Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. I'm a talk show host, researcher, lecturer, writer, and historian. So it is Tuesday, October 25th, 2022, and we are live. I wanted to come on for a few minutes and address this question that I hear often. And I'm preparing to teach a class here in a few minutes, another installment of our online class from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. But there's a question that came. I was on the Tammy Mack Business of Being Black show on the Fox Soul TV network, and we discussed. Is it time for Black people to get over slavery? Is it time for Black people to get over slavery? And I was on the panel were two Black conservatives who were largely ignorant of history. And one of them made the statement that African Americans should not get reparations because there were African Americans who owned slaves. Okay. And I hear this this statement oftentimes, but the proper historical context is not given when people make that argument. Okay. So I want to address some of that right now and give you some information about our online class that takes place on Tuesday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. All right, share this broadcast on your social media platforms. Invite your friends to tune in also. Okay, so there's a really good article from Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr., and I'm not a big fan of Gates. I have read a couple of his books. I watch his documentaries. He does do some good research, but some of his information dealing with the transatlantic slave trade is wrong. Okay. But there was a good article that he wrote for the root.com. It came out March 4th, 2013, called The Black People Own Slaves, The Black People Own Slaves. And it goes deep into this history, and it's talking about here in the United States. It goes deep into this history, and it deals with a context that is oftentimes left out of the conversation. Okay, so it's a long article, but for the sake of time, I want to focus in on the research from Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who wrote the Miseducation of the Negro in 1930, and he co-founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History in September 1915. And in 1926, he created Negro History Week, which later became Black History Month in 1976. Okay. So Gates talks about one of the most vexing questions in African American history is whether free African Americans themselves own slaves, whether free African Americans themselves own slaves. And let's see, hold on, just let me close out some of these tabs here. Okay. Just a second. Okay. Whether free African Americans own slaves. The short answer to this question, as you might suspect, is yes, of course. Some free Black people in this country bought and sold other African Americans, and did so at least since 1654, continuing to do so right through the Civil War. So Civil War is 1861 to 1865. And we deal a lot with the Civil War in the class that I teach, okay? The class I teach on Tuesdays. All right, so at least since 1654, continuing right through the Civil War. For me, the really fascinating question about Black slave owning are how many Black masters were involved, how many Black masters were involved, how many slaves did their own, how many slaves did they own, and why did they own slaves? Okay, so this gets left out of the conversation oftentimes. How many slaves did they own? How many African American slave owners were there, and why did they own slaves? Okay, so if we look at he looks at the research from Dr. Carter G. Woodson, and Woodson focused in on the 1830 census. All right, the answers to these questions are complex. The answers to these questions are complex, and historians have been arguing for some time over whether free African Americans purchased family members, whether free African Americans purchased family members in order to protect them, motivated on the one hand by benevolence and philanthropy, as historian Dr. Carter G. Woodson put it, or whether, on the other hand, they purchased other people, quote unquote, as an act of exploitation, as an act of exploitation, merely to exploit their free labor for profit, just as white slave owners did. The evidence, the evidence shows that unfortunately both things are true. The evidence shows that unfortunately both things are true. The great African American historian John Hope Franklin, who grew up, was born in Tulsa and grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, he states this clearly: the majority of Negro owners of slaves had some personal interest in their property. The majority of Negro owners of slaves had some personal interest in their property, but he admits there were instances, however, in which free Negroes had a real economic interest in the institution of slavery and held slave owners in order to improve their economic status. Okay, so just like all people, African Americans have had collaborators, African Americans have had traitors. Okay, just like all people, but other races of people, other ethnic groups of people, etc., don't get blamed for their own Holocaust. Other groups of people don't get blamed for their own Holocaust. We know there were Jewish collaborators with the Germans. We know there were Native Americans that sought out other Native Americans. All groups of people have had their traitors, okay? But they don't get blamed for their own Holocaust. John Hope Franklin goes on to say, there were instances, however, in which free Negroes had a real economic interest in the institution of slavery and held slaves in order to improve their economic status. Okay, now, in a fascinating essay reviewing this controversy, R. Halliburton shows that free Black people own slaves. Free Black people have owned slaves, quote, in each of the 13 original states, and later in every state that countenanced slavery, every state that has slavery, at least since Anthony Johnson and his wife Mary went to court in Virginia in 1654 to obtain the services of their indentured servant, a Black man named John Castor, and they went to court to have him as an indentured servant or slave for life. Okay, and they won their case. Now, and for a time, free Black people could even own the services of white indentured servants in Virginia as well. Now, if you read chapter 2 of Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr., and this is my beat up copy of the 6th edition of Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr. And this is one of the books we use in the online class I teach on Tuesdays, from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. But Lerone Bennett Jr. deals with this history, and he deals with instances of people of African descent coming from England to the U.S., because these were British colonies, English colonies, and entering into indentured servitude for about 5 to 7 years, and then being released from indentured servitude, going on to acquire land and going on to acquire white indentured servants and African slaves, or at a period of time before you start having slave codes in or codified slave laws in the 13 colonies. because the first colony to have codified slave laws was Massachusetts in 1641. They come to Connecticut in 1650, and they come to Virginia about 1661. So different colonies are having codified slave laws instituted at different times. It was not a situation where all the colonies had the same, implemented all the slave laws, slave codes all at the same time. No, it happens, it's staggered. Okay. And when those 20 and odd Africans or 20 and odd Negroes coming to Point Comfort, August 20th, 1619, codified slave laws don't exist in any of the 13 British colonies, which would later become the United States. They're going to be put into a form of indentured servitude and released after maybe about 5 or 7 years or so. Okay, some sources may say 3 to 5 years. All right, now, so let's go back to this here. Free blacks owned slaves in Boston in 1724 and in Connecticut by 1783. By 1790, the year the first census was taken, after the Philadelphia Convention, 1787, when you had the Constitution drafted and voted on, by 1790, 48 people in the state of Maryland owned 143 slaves. One particularly notorious black Maryland farmer named Nat Butler, quote, regularly purchased and sold Negroes for the Southern trade, R. Halliburton wrote. Okay, perhaps insidious or desperate attempt to defend the right of black people to own slaves was the statement made on the eve of the Civil War by a group of free people of color in New Orleans, offering their services to the Confederacy, in part because they were fearful of their own enslavement. Fearful of their own enslavement. Quote, the free colored population, native of Louisiana, own slaves, and they are dearly attached to their native land. They are dearly attached to their native land, and they are ready to shed their blood for her defense. They have no sympathy for abolitionism, no love for the North, but they have plenty for Louisiana. They will fight for her in 1861 as they fought to defend New Orleans from the British in 1814 to 1815, which was the War of 1812, which was 1812 to 1814. And this was the second war between the U.S. and Great Britain. Okay, First War, American Revolutionary War, 1775 to 1783. Then you have the War of 1812 to 1814. Okay, so these guys, to put it bluntly, opportunists par excellence, as Noah Andre Trudeau and James G. Hollingsworth Jr. explained. Once the war broke out, some of these black men formed 14 companies of militia composed of 440 men and were organized by the governor in May of 1861 into the Native Guards Louisiana, swearing to fight to defend the Confederacy. Although given no combat role, the Native Guard of Louisiana, the Native Guards Louisiana, reaching a peak of 1,000 volunteers, became the first Civil War unit to appoint black officers. So what's happening here now, Louisiana was the state that probably had the most African-American slave owners. And a lot of this had to do with the history of Louisiana and a lot of biracial people of African descent in Louisiana. Okay, because Louisiana was French territory, became part of the United States because of the Louisiana Territory became part of the United States because of the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, where the U.S. gets 828,000 square miles of land for less than 3 cents an acre from France. Okay, and one of the driving forces of the Louisiana Purchase was France was fighting against the Haitians in Haiti with the Haitian Revolution, 1791 to 1803. And France is almost going bankrupt fighting this war, and they're trying to raise money. Okay, so they sell this land here in the U.S. in the middle of basically what's the U.S. They sell that land for $15 million. Okay, to the U.S. in 1803. All right, so you're going to have African American slave owners in New Orleans, especially, who, when the Civil War breaks out, they fight on behalf of the Confederacy to maintain slavery because they own slaves, one, and then you're going to have some who fight who don't own slaves because they fear for their safety as well. They fear what's going to happen. Are they going to be enslaved? What have you? Okay, this is what's being explained here. All right, now when New Orleans fell in late April 1862 to the Union during the Civil War, about 10% of those men, not missing a beat, now formed the Native Guard Corps d'Afrique to defend the Union. J.A. Rogers, Joel Augustus Rogers, noted this phenomenon in his 100 Amazing Facts About the Negro. Quote, the Negro slaveholders, like the white ones, fought to keep their chattels in the Civil War. Okay, the Negro slaveholders, like the white ones, fought to keep their chattels in the Civil War. J.A. Rogers also notes that some African-American men, including those in New Orleans, at the outbreak of the war, quote, fought to perpetuate slavery, end quote, fought to perpetuate slavery. Okay, so how many, now this is an extremely important part here. And when this topic came up on the Tammy Mack show, The Business of Being Black on the Fox Soul TV network, that show was on October 3rd. I think that was a Monday. Okay, so that was earlier this month. That was Monday, October 3rd. I addressed it a little bit, but I said I'll deal with this more in depth on my show, on my platform, things like this, because I think we have 4 segments. We'll do 4 or 5 segments. They were about 12 minutes each, something like that. So I'm limited on what I can get into. So what were the actual numbers of Black slave owners and their slaves tells us, okay? In 1830, the year most carefully studied by Dr. Carl G. Woodson, about 13.7%, or 319,599 of the African American population in this country was free. So there was 319,599 free African Americans in 1830. Okay, this is based upon the 1830 census. Of these free African Americans, 319,000 of them, 3,776 free Negroes owned 12,907 African slaves. Okay, so you're looking at 1%, basically 1% of the free African Americans owning slaves in 1830. Okay, because 10% would be 31,000. So you're looking at right around 1% of, or a little more than 1%, maybe about 1.5% of free African Americans own slaves. All right, and they own 12,907 slaves out of a total of 2 million slaves owned in the country. So we roughly own like 6% of the slaves in the country. Okay, now this is so what came up on the show is that you had one of these Black conservatives who said that African Americans should not get reparations because there were African Americans that owned slaves. In 1830, we owned 6% of the slaves in this country. Europeans own 90%. Native Americans own probably about 4%, the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, Cherokee, and Seminole Indians. And this is something that we talked about last week in our Tuesday class. We'll talk about some more in class today, okay? So I'm going to get deeper into this for a few more minutes. We're going to post the information for, you can register for today's class also. From the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. I teach this class on Tuesdays, normally 7 p.m. to about 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to start a little later today. Then on Wednesdays, I teach from the Civil War to the Wednesdays. I teach ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. So when you go to our website, theafricanhistorynetwork.com, or click on the link that I posted here, when you scroll down the page, you'll see the information for the online classes. They're on sale $80, regularly $130. And we have a bundle pack where you get both courses for $130. Just click right here, register here. Okay. All right. And we do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch the class anytime. Even after the class is over with, you can, a year from now, 2 years from now, you'll still have full access to the class. You can go back and watch the whole thing. Okay. All right. So you're looking at, about African Americans owning about 6% of the slaves in 1830. Okay, we own 12,907 out of 2 million. All right, now what gets left out of the conversation oftentimes is who owned the textile mills. Okay, like the textile mills in New York and Rhode Island and New England that took the cotton that was produced in the South and turned that into products. Okay, who owned the shipbuilding companies that made the slave ships? Who owned the insurance companies that took out the insurance policies on the not just the slave ships to insure the Africans that they captured, but or purchased, but also they were taking out insurance policies on enslaved Africans on the plantations as well. Okay, who owned the when you look at the auctioneers and the slave auctions, okay, where they sold African people, who owned that? Who owned the newspapers that took out ads advertising wet nurses, advertising Africans for sale? And also they took out ads to announcing runaway slaves to recapture runaway slaves. Who owned the newspapers that profited from that? Okay, and then we look at these products that are being produced that are traded on Wall Street. Okay, the coffee, the sugar cane, tobacco, because the 5 major crops that were produced were tobacco, coffee, sugar cane, cotton, and rice. These were all produced by African slaves in this country. That adds to the GDP, that fuels the economy. So a lot of times I hear people say, well, my ancestors didn't own slaves, so I shouldn't have to pay reparations. Number one, nobody asked you if your ancestors owned slaves. Nobody asked you that question. We're talking about understanding a history of what happened and repairing the damage of a legacy of slavery, 246 years of slavery, Jim Crow segregation, housing discrimination, the laws and policies put in place to maldistribute wealth, power, and resources in this country. Nobody asked you if your ancestors owned slaves. So that's a non-factor when you actually understand this history. Okay. All right. Let's continue. How's everybody doing? Give us a thumbs up, give us a heart, give us a like on this broadcast. And there's an article that I was looking for that that I dealt with last week in class. And let me see, where the hell is that? It is one dealing with There's one dealing with the South. Let me try to find that here quickly. I meant to pull that up. I got so many. Oh, okay, let's continue here. So let me try to find that. It was one from history.com that dealt with the Southern economy, but okay. All right, now. Okay, so 3,776 free Negroes owned 12,907 slaves out of a total of 2 million. All right. 2 million slaves owned in the entire United States. So the numbers of slaves owned by African people, the numbers of slaves owned by Black people overall was quite small by comparison with the numbers owned by white people. Now, this is a nuance that the Black conservatives don't bring up, and the Candace Owens and the Larry Elders and things like this. They won't talk about how the number of African slaves that African people own was minuscule to what white people own. They won't get into that. In his essay, The Known World of Free Black Slaveholders, Thomas J. Presley, using Dr. Carter G. Woodson's statistics, calculated that about 1% of these Black slave owners in 1830 owned between 20 and 84 slaves. About 1% owned between 20 and 84 slaves. Okay. 172 of these Black slave owners, or about 4%, owned between 10 and 19 slaves. And 3,550, or about 94%, owned between 1 and 9 slaves. So 94% in 1830, 94% of the 3,776 Black slave owners, 94% owned between 1 and 9 slaves. The most important part here is that 42% of them, 42% of that 3,776 own just one slave. 42% own just one slave. So then if you really understand history and the history of slavery in this country, you know that you had African Americans who bought loved ones out of slavery. And they may have stayed in the South and bought loved ones out of slavery. This is a nuanced piece of history that doesn't get discussed a lot. Okay, so Thomas J. Presley also shows that the percentage of free Black slave owners as the total number of free Black heads of families was quite high in several states, namely 43% in South Carolina, 40% in Louisiana, 26% in Mississippi, 25% in Alabama, and 20% in Georgia. So why did free Black people own these slaves? So why did free Black people own these slaves? It is reasonable to assume that the 42% of free Black slave owners who owned just one slave probably owned a family member. And when you study this history, you see why. Probably owned a family member to protect that person, as did many of the other Black slave owners who owned only slightly larger number of slaves. As Dr. Carter G. Woodson put it in 1924's Free Negro Owners of Slaves in the United States in 1830, quote, the census records show that the majority of the Negro owners of slaves were such from the point of view of philanthropy. Okay, the census records show that the majority of the Negro owners of slaves were such from the point of view of philanthropy. In many instances, the husband purchased the wife or vice versa. Slaves of Negroes were in some cases the children of a free father who had purchased his wife. If he did not thereafter emancipate the mother, as so many such husbands failed to do, his own children were born his own children were born his slaves and were thus reported to the numerators, reported to the census. So when we talk about reparations and you have white conservatives and then the black conservatives parrot what the white conservatives tell them and feed them. And these are, when I was on the show, these are the same arguments from black conservatives that I heard 30 years ago. And they don't get into the history and they lack nuance. They don't talk about the fact that 75% of the world's cotton supply in 1860 was produced by the southern states of this country. And the untold millionaires that the cotton industry created in the US. All that gets left out. They just say, oh, well, black people own slaves also, therefore African Americans should not get reparations. Come on. You have to do better than that. Don't come at me with no simple Simon ass nonsense like that. And you haven't done the research. Okay, give us a thumbs up, give us a heart, give us a like on this broadcast. And there's another article I was trying to find. Then I got to jump off of here and teach this class. So stand by. Who still needs to register for the online course I teach on Tuesdays, from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. We'll post a link here again for that. And I want to show you this article briefly. This is a really good one from history.com. History.com is the official website of the History Channel. And I've got so many articles. I got thousands of them. I was just reading this article early a couple of days ago, and I don't know where the hell I put it. Oh, I think it's here in this stack here, dealing with myths about slavery. I think it's here in this stack. Okay, just a second. I'll show you two. Let me see. I'll show you one quickly here. Okay, how y'all like this type of information? And let me try to pull this up. This is, okay, I'm going to show you two quick articles, then I have to get out of here. This is the main one I was looking for. And I printed it up. I was reading it. I don't know where it is. Okay, because this is like, okay, so just give you probably about 8 inches high. All right, we're back. See, I got 2 stacks of articles dealing with history and politics, current events, all that stuff next to me. And then this is for my Tuesday night class. This is one of the binders with the curriculum, the articles, all that stuff that I teach from. This is one of them. They're actually 2 binders like that with information, because we go throughout history and we look at history chronologically, basically from 1800 through 1968. We're really it's about right about 1970. So that 170-year period of history. If we look at briefly here, this article right here, how slavery became the economic engine of the South. How slavery became the economic engine of the South. Slavery was so profitable, it sprouted more millionaires per capita in the Mississippi River Valley than anywhere else in the nation. So Black conservatives don't talk about stuff like this. And the white conservatives and the white benefactors, they're white benefactors, and the ones that finance them won't let them talk about stuff like this, to be quite honest with you. With cash crops of tobacco, cotton, and sugarcane, America's southern states became the economic engine of the burgeoning nation. Their fuel of choice, human slavery. If the Confederacy had been a separate nation, it would have ranked as the 5th richest in the world at the start of the Civil War. The slave economy had been very good to American prosperity. By the start of the war, the South was producing 75% of the world's cotton and creating more millionaires per capita in the Mississippi River Valley than anywhere in the nation. Enslaved workers represented Southern planters' most significant investment and the bulk of their wealth. They had about $3 billion invested in these African slaves, okay? So you can't say something stupid like African Americans don't deserve reparations because they were African American slave owners when we owned 6% of the slaves in 1830. 94% of us owned 94% owned one slave, okay, or about one slave, and 40 and it was let me see, 94% each owned 1 to 9 slaves, and then 42% owned just one slave, and that was most likely a family member. You can't compare that to what Europeans owned and what they did in the untold wealth that they created. There's no comparison between those two. So we have to watch when you have these people out here trying to make these false equivalencies and are advocating against our best interests. By the start of the war, the South was producing 75% of the world's cotton supply and creating more millionaires per capita in the Mississippi River Valley than anywhere in the nation. Enslaved workers represented Southern planters' most significant investment and the bulk of their wealth. So it goes on to talk about an economy based upon slavery, things like this, okay? By 1680, the British economy improved and more jobs became available in Britain. During this time, slavery had become a morally, legally, and socially acceptable institution in the colonies. As the number of European laborers coming to the colonies dwindled, enslaving Africans became a commercial necessity and more widely accepted, okay? So read this piece article here, and we deal with this in the class also. How slavery became the economic engine of the South. Okay, this is from history.com, which is the official website of the History Channel. So this is the History Channel even telling you this. This is the History Channel breaking this stuff down, okay? And then last week, if we look at this article, this other article here, the hidden links between slavery and Wall Street. The hidden links between slavery and Wall Street. Now, this is from the BBC. This is a British news source, okay? The hidden links between slavery and Wall Street. I just want to highlight a couple things here. This is from August 29th, 2019. If we scroll down here, let's see. By some estimates, where is this here? By some estimates, New York received 40% of the U.S. cotton. Right here. By some estimates, New York received 40% of U.S. cotton revenue through money its financial firms, shipping businesses, and insurance companies earned, because the North profited off of slavery in the South. Even after the North had pretty much abolished slavery, they still profited off of it. This is where the textile mills were. You had banks in the North that loaned money to slave owners in the South so they could buy more African slaves. They could buy more land. You had banks that owned money to corporations so they could expand and set up more cotton mills and different things like this. Buy more ships, whatever it was. Okay. But scholars differ on just how direct a line can be drawn between slavery and modern economic practices in the U.S. People in non-slave areas, Britain and free United States, routinely did business with slave owners and slave commerce, says Gavin Wright, professor emeritus of economic history at Stanford University. Okay, but he says the uniqueness of slavery's economic contribution has been exaggerated by some. Slavery thrived under colonial rule. British and Dutch settlers relied on enslaved African people to help establish farms and build the new towns and cities that would eventually become the United States. Because we know there were the Dutch were here also, and the Dutch, actually the Dutch colony of New Amsterdam, about 1627, they forced those enslaved Africans to build a wall in that colony to ward off Native Americans. And the colony of New Amsterdam later becomes the British colony of New York. And the wall that those Africans built is where Wall Street in New York City gets its name from. That's the wall that African people built. And right there in New York City, they traded enslaved Africans in that they would have a auction section. They would there where Wall Street is, they would trade enslaved Africans there also. Now, enslaved people were brought to work on cotton, sugar, and tobacco plantations, and tobacco was the big in the U.S. Tobacco was the big cash crop before cotton became the big cash crop. Cotton largely is going to become the big cash crop after 1794, after the cotton gin is created by Eli Whitney, and it drastically reduces the labor cost of producing cotton and makes it much easier to produce cotton, which then increases the need for enslaved Africans, okay, to plant the cotton. Now, the crops they grew were sent to Europe, okay? The crops that were grown in the U.S., especially in the South, are going to be sent to Europe to be turned into finished products. Those finished products were used to fund trips to Africa to obtain more African slaves, more Africans to become slaves, who were then trafficked back to America. The triangular trade route was profitable for investors. To raise the money to start many future plantation owners, to raise the money to start, many future plantation owners turned to capital markets in London, England, selling debt that was used to purchase boats, goods, and eventually purchase African people. Okay, so read this piece here. Then they go on and talk about the banks. In 2005, J.P. Morgan Chase, currently the biggest bank in the U.S., admitted that two of its subsidiaries, Citizens Bank and Canal Bank in Louisiana accepted enslaved people as collateral for loans. If plantation owners defaulted on loan payments to the banks took ownership of these African slaves. J.P. Morgan Chase was not alone. The predecessors that made up Citibank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo are among a list of well-known U.S. financial firms that benefited from the slave trade. Okay, so read the rest of this article here, the hit between slavery and Wall Street. Okay, so you can't compare African Americans owning 6% of the slaves and 42% of the African slaves they own most likely were family members. You can't compare that to what Europeans did. That's ridiculous. Okay, then, okay, that was the second article. All right, that I wanted to share. Okay, give us a thumbs up, give us a heart, give us a like on this broadcast. How you all like this type of information? Let's just look at some of your comments here quickly. You can post your comments here also. And you can read, this is a class that I teach on Tuesdays, normally 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm going to jump off and so I can start teaching this class at our online school. It's from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. And we have the information on the homepage of our website, theafricanhistorynetwork.com, theafricanhistorynetwork.com. And the link I posted there is our history courses link. Okay, so Tuesdays, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch it anytime. Click right here, register here. It takes you to the next page and just click on enroll. Okay. Classes don't sell $80, regular $130. You can use this information with your children. I would say the information is PG-13. Okay. And let's see right here. I would say the information is PG-13. And it's very visual. We look at articles, video clips, book references. I have a PowerPoint presentation also. Click right here, enroll, and then just follow the steps. And as soon as you register, you can watch the previous classes also. Okay, so there's archived content for you to watch as well. And on the homepage of our website, if you click here where it shows the menu, if you're on a smartphone, it'll say menu. Click there. If not, you can click right here. If you're on a computer, click on history courses, and it takes you to the next page with the history courses here, the two classes that I teach. So on Wednesday, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time is Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. So we do that Wednesday, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can register for that course also. And we have the classes in the bundle pack. So you can register for both classes for $130. That's over $300. That's about a $360 value because there's bonus content that you get as well. So you can click on right here, register here for the bundle pack. Okay, the bundle pack of courses also, and there's bonus content that you can start watching as well. Just scroll down, click on enroll, click on buy now, and you can register for the classes. And you can use this information with your children as well. Okay, all right. So hopefully you like this type of information. Hopefully you learned a lot also. And if you want to support the African History Network another way, $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show. And we have the information right on the homepage of our website, also theafricanhistorynetwork.com. Okay. This helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting, pay some of the bills, etc. And we have the information. Let me see here. We have the information around the homepage of the website also. Let me see here. Where is it? Okay, yeah, scroll down. We have the information right here with the links, PayPal and Cash App. And this is our official Cash App account, $ the AHN show, SHOW. When you go to the, say, Michael, these other ones here, and there's like 5 of them that I've identified are fake African History Network Cash App accounts. I'm still trying to get them shut down. Okay, so I opened up an investigation with Cash App. I followed up with them last week, and I'm still trying to get these fake ones shut down because they've been stealing money from us. All right, look, we have to get out of here. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you next time, and we'll see, hopefully see you in our classes as well. Okay. All right. Talk to you next time. Peace.